I want you to just close your eyes for a second and picture a scene. It feels almost like the opening shot of a Cold War thriller.
Hmm.
It's the early 1960s. The location, it could be a humid, bustling dock in Mombasa, Kenya, or, I don't know, a hazy port in Malaya. The sun is setting, literally and metaphorically, on the British Empire.
Right. The end of an era.
Exactly. And you see these ships being loaded up, massive vessels getting ready to leave these colonies for good. But in the middle of all this chaos, military guys packing bags, administrators signing forms, there are these crates, hundreds of wooden crates.
And if you were watching really closely, you'd notice something odd happening with those crates.
Okay.
Some are being walked up the gangplanks, headed back to London, but others are being shoved into these huge furnaces that were installed specifically for this very moment.
Wow.
Where they'd be rowed out on little boats, weighed down with concrete blocks, and just dumped into the deepest parts of the ocean.
It sounds so cinematic, doesn't it? Like a scene from a spy novel where the villain is, erasing his tracks.
It does. But this wasn't fiction. This is official government policy. For decades, if you asked a historian or a government official about the gaps in the records from this period, you'd just get a shrug.
Right. You'd hear these mumbled excuses about lost wartime records or administrative chaos.
Or termites. Termites was an actual excuse they used in some
You're
places.
kidding. Termites.
Not kidding. But today, we're unpacking the reality behind that smokescreen. We are doing a deep dive into Operation Legacy.
Operation Legacy, that name is.
Yeah.
It's so heavy, so deliberate, it doesn't sound like Operation Cleanup. It sounds like they were building something.
They were. And that name, for a very long time, it didn't exist in any public file. It was a secret, systematic operation to purge the historical record across the entire crumbling British Empire.
The premise we're looking at today is, it's terrifyingly simple on the surface, but the implications are just huge. Publicly, the end of the British Empire was presented as this really dignified, managed transfer of power. The images, Prince Philip or some other royal shaking hands, the Union Jack coming down slowly.
The new national anthem playing.
Exactly. We're leaving you with the rule of law, railways, and a parliament. All very stiff upper lip.
That was the public face, the managed retreat, they called it. But privately, there was panic. And the thing they were most afraid of wasn't an army or a communist coup or even a riot.
You have paper.
It was paper.
Paper. It seems so mundane, but in this context, paper is dangerous. Paper holds memory.
It's evidence. That's what it is. And what really stands out in the source material we've got for this deep dive is just the sheer scale of this fear. This wasn't, a few rogue officials panicking and burning their personal diaries.
Yeah.
This was a formal instruction from the colonial office in London. It went out to administrators in Kenya, Malaya, Cyprus, Aden, basically anywhere the British flag was about to come down. The mission was clear. Edit history before the new independent governments could read it for themselves.
So our goal for this deep dive is to really understand how that editing happened, the actual mechanics of it, what exactly was hidden for 50 years, and here's where it gets really heavy, the massive impact this had on justice for the victims of colonial violence.
Because when you burn the evidence, you're not just erasing ink.
You're erasing accountability.
And you're shaping the entire future narrative. Yeah. And to understand how they got away with it for so long, we have to look at the bureaucracy of the purge. That's the part that really, it just strikes me reading through these files.
That wasn't chaotic?
It wasn't chaotic at all. It wasn't some riotous bonfires, highly organized. It was bureaucratic destruction.
Right. Let's unpack that methodology, because the sources describe a system that is, it's chillingly efficient. It wasn't just burn everything.
Yoda.
They had this sophisticated categorization system to basically decide what history was going to look like. It kind of reminds me of decluttering your house, but instead of keep, donate, and trash, the stakes are geopolitical.
That's a really good analogy. As independence got closer, administrators were told to review all records. Yeah. Every single file in the governor's office, police stations, intelligence centers, everything. And they had to sort them into 3 distinct piles.
Okay, let's walk through these piles. So pile 1, the legacy files. These were the files that could be safely handed over to the new governments.
Right. This was the safe history. Infrastructure plans, agricultural reports, educational statistics, stuff that made the administration look competent and helpful.
Benevolent.
A
highlight reel.
Exactly. The goal was to leave a paper trail that showed the British Empire as a modernizing force.
Okay. Then you had the second category. These are crucial, right? The migrated archives.
Yes. These were the documents that were way too sensitive to leave behind. Maybe they had intelligence sources or details on political maneuvering, but they were too valuable to just destroy.
Valuable to British history or future intelligence.
Right, so they were packed up, stamped, migrated, and shipped to Britain to be locked away.
And then the third category, the files that were not supposed to survive at all. The burn pile.
The destruction pile. This is where the operation gets really dark.
So what were the actual criteria? I mean, I was looking at the instructions in our notes, and the language is just, it's fascinatingly vague, but also really specific. What makes a piece of paper so dangerous it has to be drowned in the ocean?
The instructions were all about protecting the reputation of the empire at all costs. Officials were told to remove anything that could, and this is a direct quote, embarrass Her Majesty's government.
Embarrass Her Majesty's government.
Also, anything that could undermine British authority or expose misconduct or compromise intelligence sources.
That phrase, embarrass, is so uniquely British for this context. It makes it sound like they're talking about a diplomatic mistake, like spilling tea on a dignitary or something.
It's a massive euphemism.
But they're using embarrassment as a cover for something much, much darker.
Absolutely. And the language they used to justify this was very, well, administrative. They didn't use words like cover-up or evidence destruction. They used words like sensitivity and security.
Of course.
They argued, internally of course, that they had a responsibility to remove documents that might, inflame post-independence tensions.
Which sounds almost noble if you don't think about it too hard, like, oh, we're just keeping the peace. But the physical lengths they went to tell a totally different story. I mean, the sources mention that in some colonies, they literally couldn't burn the paper fast enough.
That's right. In Kenya especially, the volume of sensitive stuff was so high they had to install incinerators specifically for this job.
The existing furnaces couldn't handle the load.
Exactly. And for the coastal colonies, where burning might attract too much attention, smoke signals, literally, they used deep water dumping protocols.
And this wasn't just like chucking paper in the harbor where it might float back up onto a beach.
No, this was methodical. They took the crates out on Navy vessels to specific coordinates way out to sea. They weighted them with concrete to make sure they sank immediately and stayed down.
And there was a protocol for it.
Oh, yes. The protocol required that senior officials had to certify the destruction, which is the ultimate bureaucratic irony, right?
Yeah.
You need a form to certify that you've destroyed all the other forms.
It's incredible.
Ah.
I hereby certify that I have successfully destroyed the evidence of the crime.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
And only once a senior official had signed off that the sensitive material was now ash or pulp, only then could the independence ceremonies proceed. It was a prerequisite for the handover.
What a jarring image to hold in your head. The bands are playing, fireworks are going off, the new flag is rising, and just off camera, the furnaces are cooling down or the crates are sinking into the abyss.
Yeah. But let's pivot to the content. What was actually in those files? Why were they so scared of them surviving? Because embarrassment is one thing, but you don't build industrial incinerators just to hide some rude comments about local politicians.
No, you don't. And this is where we get into the dark heart of this deep dive. We are not talking about diplomatic gossip. We're talking about evidence of systematic state violence.
The sources specifically focus on the Mau uprising in Kenya in the 1950s. And this was a brutal conflict, right?
Oh, extremely brutal. The British response involved detaining thousands upon thousands of people. Some estimates say up to 150,000. And the records from those detention camps were just horrific.
What kind of records?
We're talking about detailed logs of interrogation methods.
And when you say interrogation, we should be clear. You mean torture.
I do. The files detailed castration, sexual abuse, severe beatings, burning, and not just, random acts of violence by a few stressed out guards. We're seeing records of collective punishments where whole villages were targeted.
Forced relocations. Using starvation as a weapon to break resistance.
And these weren't just vague reports or rumors, were they? The sources say the bureaucracy of the empire was still ticking along. They were documenting the stuff like they were documenting tax returns.
That's the paradox of it all. Even when you're doing something terrible, you create a paper trail because the system demands reports. So there were medical records showing injuries consistent with torture. There were photographs of the camps, reports on the conditions.
And the most damning thing of all,
the internal debates about the legality of what they were doing.
Wait, so they wrote down that they knew it might be illegal.
They did. There were memos going back and forth debating whether the violence they were using was legal under British law or international conventions, whether it was moral. These documents proved that the people in charge, the senior officials in the governor's office and back in London, knew exactly what was happening.
They were discussing the liability.
Yes, which completely destroys the whole bad apple defense. You know, the narrative that later claimed this was just a few rogue soldiers or local excesses.
If you have memos debating the legality of torture going back to London, it's policy. It's not an accident.
Precisely. It turns it from an unfortunate incident into a systematic strategy. And that explains the name, Operation Legacy. Think about that word again, legacy. It means they were curating what they wanted to leave behind.
Crafting the memory of the empire.
They wanted the history books to say rule of law, railways, and civilization.
Yep.
They did not want the history books to say torture camps and incinerators.
And for a long, long time, it actually worked. That's the scary part. This operation happened in the 60s. We're only really talking about the full scale of it now. How did they keep a secret this big for so long?
Well, history is written by the people who own the archives, right? So for decades, historians knew there were holes. If you were a researcher trying to study the end of the empire in Kenya or Malaya, you just hit these dead ends.
Like a policy just appears out of thin air.
Exactly. Suddenly, we are doing this. But no memo explaining why. You'd see the result, but the discussion leading up to it was just gone.
And the government's excuse was?
Poor record keeping. Or they'd blame the chaos of World War II, or the rush of decolonization. They'd say, oh, things just got lost in the shuffle. It was a messy time.
And people just bought that. It seems almost too convenient. Oh, sorry, we lost the file on torture, but we kept the file on tea exports.
For the most part, yeah. Or at least they couldn't prove otherwise. Silence became the norm. The files weren't cataloged where anyone could find them. And remember the name Operation Legacy itself. It didn't appear in government files for decades.
It was a secret operation within the secret world.
Exactly. Even the existence of the migrated archives, those files they shipped back to London, was denied.
So what was it that cracked it open? Because obviously we know about it now.
The turning point was 2011. And it didn't come from a historian finding some dusty box in an attic. It didn't come from a politician having a crisis of conscience.
It came from the victims.
It came from the victims. 50 years later, a group of elderly Kenyan survivors of the detention camps, Mau Mau veterans, brought a legal case against the British government.
And these are people in their 70s and 80s by this point.
Yes. They were seeking compensation and an apology for the torture they'd endured.
And the government's defense, I'm guessing, was, we have no records of any of this.
Initially, yes. Or they argued that the responsibility had passed to the Kenyan government at independence. But during the discovery phase of the legal process, the British government was finally forced to show its hand. The court ordered a thorough search.
Okay.
And that is when the government lawyers finally had to admit that, actually, a large cache of colonial-era documents did exist.
The famous migrated archives.
The very same. They hadn't been lost. They hadn't been destroyed in a fire. They were sitting in a highly secure government facility in Buckinghamshire, a place called Hanslope Park.
Hanslope Park. That sounds like a lovely country estate, not a high-security intelligence center.
It is a high-security intelligence center. And they'd been there the whole time. 8,800 files from 37 former colonies. We're talking about 200 yards of shelving.
And for half a century, they just sat on them, denied they even existed.
Sat on them. And when these files were finally opened up because of this court case, it was an absolute bombshell.
Because the contents confirmed everything the survivors had been saying all along.
Every single word. The abuse wasn't made up. The torture wasn't an exaggeration. And crucially, it confirmed that senior officials in London were fully informed at the time.
That's the smoking gun.
It is. It shifted the narrative from folklore or memory to hard documented fact. It wasn't just happening in Kenya. London was watching it happen, reading the reports, and deciding not to stop it.
Which brings us to the real cost of this. Because it's easy for us to get lost in the spy novel part of it, the secret files in a secure facility. But real people were hurt by this silence. This was not a victimless crime.
Not at all. And this is the most important takeaway, really. This isn't just about academic history. It's about justice. For 50 years, survivors had to rely entirely on their own oral testimony.
And we know how courts, and frankly, Western history in general, treat oral testimony compared to an official document.
If it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Right. It's a he said, she said problem, but on a massive geopolitical scale.
And the destruction of those records shifted the burden of proof onto the victims. These were people who were often poor, elderly, living with incredible trauma. They were the least equipped to fight a legal battle against a G7 nation.
And the government held all the cards, or rather, held all the files and just refused to show them.
Precisely. They could just deny, prove it. And they knew the victims couldn't because the proof was either locked away in Buckinghamshire or it was ash at the bottom of the Indian Ocean.
So in Kenya, an apology took 50 years.
More than 50 years. And many of the victims died before that apology ever came. And even when it did, it rested on incomplete documentation because, and we have to remember, this Operation Legacy was partly successful. We found the Hanslope Park files, but we will never, ever see the files that went into the furnaces.
That is a chilling thought. We only know what survived. We have the files deemed safe enough to keep, even if secretly. We have no idea what was considered too dangerous, even for the secret archive.
Correct. The historical record was permanently altered. What we have is selective. We have, the best of the worst, maybe, but the absolute worst, that's gone.
So why wasn't this a bigger scandal earlier on? I mean, a government burning its own records, that seems like a huge deal.
I think context is everything. First, you had the Cold War. In the 60s, everyone was focused on the Soviet Union, not on administrative details in the colonies. Second, the sheer speed of decolonization was a huge distraction.
Right. The new governments in places like Kenya had more urgent problems. They were dealing with poverty, building a nation. They didn't have time to chase paper trails.
Exactly. And back in Britain, the empire was over. The national mood was to move on, look toward the future. There was never a parliamentary debate about Operation Legacy at the time.
It just ended with quiet administrative closure instead of accountability.
That phrase from the sources really sticks with you, doesn't it? It's the ultimate bureaucratic victory. You commit the act, burn the proof, and then you file the silence away until everyone who cares is gone.
But they didn't count on those elderly Kenyan survivors. They didn't count on the persistence of memory.
No, they didn't. And that's the one glimmer of hope here. The truth, or at least a big part of it, did eventually come out. It took half a century, but the wall of silence cracked.
So where does that leave us today? The Hanslope Park files are public now, right?
They are. They're in the National Archives in Kew. You can go and request them. Historians are reading them line by line, trying to piece this all together. But every time they turn a page, they have to be aware of an absence.
It's like trying to read a book where every third chapter has been ripped out. You can follow the plot, but you miss so much of the connecting tissue.
And you missed the culpability. That's the key. The destruction didn't erase the events. The torture still happened. But it changed how those events could be understood and adjudicated forever.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening today? Why does a pile of burnt paper from 1961 matter in 2025?
I think it forces us to fundamentally question the official record. When we look at history books or even government statements today, we tend to see them as the definitive truth. We think archives are these neutral places.
But they aren't neutral. They're curated. They're edited. History is a construct built by people with agendas. And if the agenda is, don't look bad,
then the history reflects that. And silence isn't just the absence of noise. In this case, silence was a weapon. It was a manufactured product designed to protect power.
that is the thought that will keep me up at night. The idea that silence can be engineered.
It leaves us with a really haunting question, one that was raised in the source material. What does it mean when an official record ends not with an explanation, but with silence?
It means there is a story there that someone really didn't want you to hear, and maybe that's the most important story of all.
I think you're right.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into Operation Legacy. It's a heavy topic, but I think an essential one if we want to understand how the world we live in was actually built and what was swept under the rug during the construction.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to always look for the gaps.
Thank you for listening. And remember, next time you read a history book, ask yourself what's not on the page. See you in the next deep dive.